Race fans, I want to welcome everybody to the Museum of Drag Racing. This is Don Garlits' home here. I don't actually mean he lives here, but I mean it's the home of his history of drag racing that he was in for a number of years. And of course this is just south of Ocala, just a little bit. I wish I could remember what turnoff it was, but I don't. But anyway, we are at his museum for a little trip around memory lane, and we're going to go inside and look at some of the historic cars that he ran over the years, and hopefully we can make it interesting for you. But enough of the talk, let's go inside and take a look. Well, right here, just as soon as you walk in the front door, is the car that pretty much put Don Garlits on the map. This is Swamp Rat 1, and of course it's a Hemi powered car. And just right up above here you'll see a sign that says Ed Escuderian Racing Cams. I think he was a big part of Garlits' history as far as that goes. But gee, what memories and stuff this brings back. But like I say, this is the car that pretty much started it. Look at them slicks. They must be every bit of at least 8 inches wide. We'll walk on up here to where the sign is, and you can see it says Swamp Rat 1, built by Don Garlits in his home garage in Tampa, Florida. Set Don's first world record at Brooksville, Florida, November 10th, 1957. 176 miles an hour with an 8.79 was Don's first national championship, set at 1958 at Great Bend, Kansas. Car restored by Garlits and Tom Lemons for the museum. Got another sign on the floor here. Let me see if we can know if you can read that. Swamp Rat 1 was my first Chrysler Hemi powered fuel dragster. I went to the front page of Drags News when I outran the world champion Cook and Bedwell at the 1957. The C&B team had never lost a race up to that point. Then the following November 10th, 57, and after extensive modifications to Swamp Rat 1, I set the all-time drag racing world would never be the same. This is the original car. I never sold it. But there's what put Don on the map right there. Swamp Rat 1. Know if this is looks like it could be the motor that's in that car, might be a backup or whatever, but of course it's a Chrysler Hemi. Got 8 carburetors on top. Just absolutely crazy how big and how much horsepower. Looks like a handmade manifold on top of that. This is a replica of the first car that Don Garlits made. It's a flathead dragster, and you can see the engine there with 3 carburetors on it. A little low flathead. I think that's a Canadian flathead. Engelbrock heads. 6-inch drag slicks. Let's come back here and I'll read you something about this. It says Don built his first dragster at the shop where he worked in Tampa in '54 using 2 sets of Model T frames. For a long wheelbase, this was for better traction. Using this combination, he won the first NHRA event at the Drag Safari in August of 1955. The car was so ugly, Hot Rod magazine would not run a picture of it. Finally, in '62, the old flathead appeared in Hot Rod's scrapbook section. It was completely scavenged for parts in '56 to build Swamp Rat 1, except for the OT rails, which were later scrapped by Art Malone. Garlits and Donnie Saller built this working replica for the enjoyment of future generations. I think that's a 1948 Canadian Ford Z-Block 289. It's got a Smith & Jones 270X cam, 16 mushroom lifters, sharp triple manifold, Stromberg carbs, Alky nitro tranny, 1939 Ford second and high gear only, 1940 Ford 411 rear end, and like I say, the 6-inch slicks. But man, looks pretty primitive if you just look at it. You think, man, would you want to get in one of those or not? Many people do. Well, they're starting to look just a little bit more like what we are accustomed to seeing today, only they're still front engine. But this is the Swamp Rat 6, and he ran this from 1964 to 65. It's a 63 built for Art to Colonial Malone, built it for Big Daddy, and it was built in Great Plains, New Jersey. Set the NHRA record in 1964 of 201 miles an hour with a 7.78 ET. This car here was the first official 200 mile an hour run in drag racing. This famous Swamp Rat was the first of the swoopy tail section Garlits cars. Connie Swingle built Swamp Rat 6 in the fall of 63 for Malone and rebuilt it for Big Daddy in the spring of 64. The Windjammer set the national record twice, won Indy, Bakersfield, and the British Drag Festival, was on the cover of Hot Rod magazine and featured in Sports Illustrated. Like I say, starting to look a little bit more like what we're used to seeing. Swamp Rat 6, 64, 65. Yeah, moving on here, we've got Swamp Rat 10. Seems like they're getting a little lower and a little more swept looking. But this was originally built by Connie Swingle at the Nebraska Avenue shop in Tampa, driven by Swingle at Bakersfield in 65. First Garlits car he used in the 1964 was the 426-inch Dodge Hemi Longhead, 275-inch wheelbase in Don's shop in Troy, Michigan. Okay, this is Swamp Rat 11, and it's the Wind Charger Eliminator, of which, after not being able to qualify for the Nationals, Garlits decided that he would try and build something that was lighter. This car only weighs 1,300 pounds. Him, his wife, and Bob Taffy built this car in 72 hours. He was a little upset after not qualifying for the Nationals in 66, so he decided to build this car and give it a try. Big Daddy grew a beard and vowed not to shave until the car broke into the 60s. He shaved it off after winning the U.S. Nationals in Indy later that year. After running a 677 ET, the Eliminator was then sold to Schiffner Manufacturing Company for display. It was in the Bob Patterson Museum in Hollywood many years, and in 78 returned to the Garlits Museum here in Gainesville. This here car is called the Bomb, or second name would be the Accident Car. This is the car that Don Garlits developed and ran, and on March 8, 1970, why, Big Daddy had a little problem with this thing, as it was a planetary transmission, one of the first cars to have a planetary transmission. Only problem is it exploded, and when it did, it just about took his foot off. He lost part of it, but you can see in the case here, these are the parts that exploded out of that thing. The squat failure in the transmission caused an engine overspeed on the starting line, resulting in the drum inside the tranny to exceed 25,000 RPMs. You're looking at the consequences of this overspeed. I'll move over here and you'll see a picture of Don in the car. how it broke in half right there. It looks like about at the end of the bell housing or whatever. And he's actually sitting up in the air looking down at the ground. I'm going to try and move up here and show you this car. It's really kind of crazy because if you look at this, you'll see the rear end is right between his legs. Let's see it down there. So that might give you some idea of what happened. Looks like it come apart right between his legs, like I say, took part of his right foot. Okay, this is Swamp Rat 12, and it's a Tander from 1968. And it was built in the spring of '68 by Don Garlits and Bob Taffy at the Seffner, Florida. Tater became the first dragster over 240 miles an hour at Alton, Illinois. Later in the year won the Spring Nationals at Englishtown, New Jersey, and the prestigious U.S. Nationals in Indy during the fall of '68. Tater was fitted with a Trick Tom Hanna body and painted by Carter. Tater then won the Professional Dragster Association Series in California. It was then sold to Wins and shipped to Belgium in 1969. Tater was found in the Belgian warehouse of Wins International in '82 and returned to the Museum of Drag Racing. Underwent 1 year restoration and placed on display in 1985. Top speed for this car was 240 miles an hour with an ET of 680, 426 cubic inches, 1,300 pounds. Beautiful car, beautiful restoration. As you look at these, you just think what beautiful pieces of engineering and body work and mechanical work. But this is Swamp Rat 16. It was built in 1972, and it debuted at the AHRA World Finals in Fremont, California, winning the first outing by beating the team of Warren, Colburn, Miller, and Wybe. Retired in '73 and sold to the Wynn Oil Company. In '76 it was restored by Ed and Don Garlits and loaned to the Florida Sports Hall of Fame. Cypress Gardens returned to the museum in 1985. This car had a top speed of 243 and also low ET of 605, and that was a 1972 Gators track record in this. And of course you see now that we've definitely switched over to the rear engine cars, of which Garlits was a big time innovator in doing that. Here we've got Swamp Rat 22. This is really starting to look more like a modern day dragster. This was built 75 to 77, and it's the 250 car. It was built in 1975 by Don Cook and Big Daddy. This car became the most feared dragster of all time. It consistently ran in the high 240s and the 570 brackets. It won Don's only NHRA World Championship, beating out the likes of Beck, Muldowney, and a host of other fine competitors. Became the first dragster over 250 miles an hour at the Ontario, California on October 12, 1975 with an ET of 5.63, a record which stood for a full 7 years. It was retired in the fall of '75 and then put back in service for a brief period in '77 to win the Gator Nationals. Wow. First 250, I'm sorry, with a 563. This is Don Garlits' first rear engine car, built in 1970 to 71. This, of course, was after the accident that he'd had, I believe, is '69. And it was built by Don, Connie Swingle, and Tom Lemons Built this car at the Seffner shop in Florida. It won 6 national events and later toured the Carl Casper show circuit. It was then returned to the museum. It had a top speed of 244 and low ET of 621. But here's your first rear engine car built by Don Garlits. Does look quite a bit safer for the driver. No rear end right between your feet. Swamp Rat 3, built in 1960. It is the first 4130 chrome moly tubing car to come out of the Garlits automotive shop in Tampa, Florida. Swamp Rat 3 quickly set both ends of the drag racing news 1320 records, a blistering 189 miles an hour in 8.23 seconds. Connie Swingle drove this car to the SR3 to many wins throughout the U.S. until a parachute failed at Emporia, Virginia, setting Swingle into the pine woods and destroying the first of the 3 Swamp Rat cars. Give you a look with that one going that way, and then kind of a driver's view here. Looks like a lot of motor to look around, but whatever. This is what they call the black car. It's number 26. Was built in 81, ran through 84, built entirely by Don Garlits at the Seffner, Florida shop with the assistance of Tommy Lemons. The car was constructed to compete on the AHRA tracks. It set a world record of 260 miles an hour in Chicago in 1982. It won the AHRA World Championships in 82 and 83. It had powered by a 495 cubic inch Keith Black Dodge Hemi, producing 2,700 horsepower at 9,600 RPM. Top speed was 260 miles an hour, low ET of 5.56. What you might call a real hot rod. It's a little local favor. Probably some old drag racers from around the Kansas City area will remember. This here is Pandemonium 3, built by Bob Sullivan. Bob started racing on the streets in 46 and won his first drag race at an NHRA event in Scribner, Nebraska in 54, setting the strip record of 123 miles an hour. Rod Stuckey built the Pandemonium for Bob in 57 in Kansas City, Kansas. This beautiful dragster set the AHRA record of 184 miles an hour in 1961 at the Green Valley, Texas racing facility and beat Big Daddy for the AHRA championship at Kansas City, Kansas in 1960. Bob drove the funny car in his final racing days and retired in 74. Pandemonium had been stored in the garage in Kansas City since 62. Bob and his wife Shirley donated the car to the museum in 1983. Once again, top speed 185.60 with a low ET of 8.10. Here is the car and driver that probably brought more women into drag racing. And of course, it's the Shirley Muldowney Dragster, 1980. The greatest woman race car driver of all time, 3-time NHRA Top Fuel World Champion, many-time holder of Top Fuel records in NHRA and AHRA, 1981 AHRA World Champion, only drag racer to have a full-length movie made for her, Heart Like a Wheel, made of her life on June 29, 1984, had a severe crash in her Top Fuel dragster in Montreal at a speed of 247 miles an hour. Both Shirley's legs were severely broken and she is now recovering nicely. Shirley will be back. But of course she has retired, so she's not in drag racing anymore. But still, like I say, probably the person that had more to do with getting women involved on the track and also in fans of drag racing, but Shirley Muldowney couldn't go through the museum without this.